Well, hello, and welcome to Tom Rhodes Radio Smart Camp. Greetings from my apartment, and it's great. In 35 years, I've never not had to travel. I'm always traveling. It's amazing that I can just be home and work on these projects and spend time with my mom. I want to start out giving a shout out to a few people. The wonderful people that support the podcast. I got a great email from Michael in London telling me how he's doing. He's working, and he's divorced. He's got his two sons. Michael wrote me a wonderful letter after when I was going through my divorce, reaching out to me, and I met him when I was in London last year. He's got two young sons. He realizes what's most important in life, and that's his sons. Hey, Michael, hope you're doing great. My man Benny in Copenhagen, Denmark. He wrote me a similar beautiful letter and saying that he's still working and he's looking after he's divorced also. And he also wrote me a nice message when I was going through my divorce. He's the scientist who said that there's no reason atoms either hold together forever or they fall apart. And Benny is looking after his two daughters, and he realizes that that's the most important thing in his life. So in my magical way of thinking, I hope one day these two daughters and two sons will one day meet each other. And we'll have a Tom Rhodes Radio Smart Camp picnic somewhere in northern Germany or something. My man Shane in Sydney, Australia, wrote me a nice email telling me that my podcast has helped him through a lot of difficult times in his life. And Peter in Manchester, New Hampshire, wrote me... said he's got to support the guy who has been making him laugh all these years when he became a golden Buddha last week. And Ellen and Anthony in, West Orange, New Jersey. And she asked me if I'd ever played at Rascals Comedy Club. And I did play at Rascals Comedy Club when I lived in New York City at the end of the 90s. And I loved it there. And the thing that I loved about it, the owner was a young guy, and he had made the front of his comedy club like a garage sale. Or not like a garage sale, more like collectibles for sale in glass cabinets. And he had really cool stuff. And I still have it to this day, a plastic Colonel Sanders piggy bank. And it's such a cool piggy bank. Colonel Sanders is holding the bucket of chicken in his left hand. And then with his right hand, he's got a drumstick of chicken, and he's holding it over his heart. Absolutely love that thing. It's too bad that club closed. Ellen suggested that I read. She's on a Jack Kerouac reading spree, and or just telling me that she loved Kerouac, and she suggested that I read Satori in Paris, which I read Kerouac, all of his stuff in my 20s. When I was living in San Francisco. It was one of the reasons I moved to San Francisco. And I remember Sartori in Paris didn't grab me. But at that time, I had never been to Paris. So I think I'm going to read that book again. I'm going to get back into it. It's another beautiful day in captivity. I'm sitting here with my mom. This episode, we're going to talk about books and art. Because my mom has been crushing books since she got here on March 9th. You've been here for a month and a half, Mom. How's your lockdown experience?
Well, it's hard to believe that I've been here a month and a half. I was only planning to be here a week. And
and you only brought enough undies and things for a week?
For a week. So, it's been great.
I should point out that I went to Target to get you some underwear, and then I asked the girl to help me, and I said, nothing with lace, it's for my mother.
Actually, it's good to have extra underwear, but we are washing things. We do have a washing and drying machine, so that's great.
Thank goodness. I'm sorry I cut you off. What were you going to say about your experience?
That it's, worldwide now. I talked to my relatives in Argentina, and they're doing the same thing we are, just trying to stay home and survive. All my friends are doing the same thing, staying in and being careful when they go somewhere. And most of my older friends, their children are stepping up and are buying groceries for them and stuff. So that's good.
That's good. Everybody in the world is experiencing this exact same thing right now. Nobody can go anywhere, till the threat of our possible human extinction passes. And we keep seeing things like we've stayed away from the news a lot.
Yes, that's a good thing.
That's a good thing. Especially after Trump said you should inject
come on,
disinfectant. I haven't looked at the news since then.
Yeah, well, you listen to the news, you'll get depressed. So my idea is we can get along without listening to the news.
Yeah, but what we have heard when we've listened to the news is people talking about how bored they are, which you and I
seem to have a problem.
We haven't had a problem with that, and no. I'm so impressed with the amount of books that you've read, and I want to talk about the art documentaries that we've watched. But first of all, let's start with the first book you read when you got here was Mark Twain's Joan of Arc.
Well, that was because the day before I came, I went to a play where one of our family friends, Darrell Wells, was playing in a play, Mother of the Maid, and it was from the viewpoint of Joan of Arc's mother. And it was a really interesting way to look at it. I hadn't even thought about how her mother might have felt. And so
that's an interesting angle.
Yeah, so when we started,
Joan, you can't kill anyone until you turn 20. What was her mother saying?
It was we started talking about Joan of Arc and the play and how much I enjoyed it and how it was a whole new way of looking at it. And you said you happen to have a book that Mark Twain wrote about Joan of Arc, and so you pulled out the book, and I thought, geez, I'll read it. And so I started reading it, and it followed the play quite a bit. Whoever did the play must have read Mark Twain's Joan of Arc, which I read that he took like 10 years to write this book, and he didn't really want people to know that it was him writing the book, because they would expect something funny. And the book was really...
And I read his biography that... he thought this book was his best work, and he used to read passages to his daughters and his wife, and he thought the book was so great it would stand on his own even without his name attached to it.
It was a really good book. I enjoyed it. It made her seem real and more like a human being. I hadn't really thought about, everybody knows about Joan of Arc. What little I knew about her, this really went into her life and everything. And I did enjoy the book. I thought he did a wonderful job of writing this.
Do you, anything specific that you remember from the life of Joan of Arc? Or you want to read any of those highlights?
Well, you highlight books. I don't make any marks on my books.
I mark them all up.
I sometimes put a mark on one of the edges of the page that I want to come back and look at. But
you'll bend a corner?
Yeah, bend a corner, but I don't mark my books, which in a way is a shame, because then you can't remember what stood out to you as much as when you underline or highlight something. But it was a great book. I really enjoyed it.
Well, like within that play, what was the point about the mother? What was the mother's opinion of Joan of Arc being called by God to go fight for the French army?
At first, they thought she was kind of crazy, but she really wasn't. And they had priests look at her and ask her all kinds of questions. And it was kind of a shame that she had made sure that the king was crowned king of France. And when she was taken as a prisoner, she landed in a trap, and so she was taken prisoner. And usually when knights were taken prisoners, and somebody would pay a ransom for them, and the king did not pay the ransom for her.
And she had made him king.
Yeah.
So Charles VII betrayed her.
Yes, he definitely did not stand up for her.
And so basically he let her get burned at the stake.
Yeah, they decided.
So he fucked her.
Well, he was cowardly.
Yeah.
So that was bad.
And ungrateful.
And very ungrateful. I thought.
I've been to the Champagne region of France. The biggest city is Reims, however you pronounce it. The Reims Cathedral is where Joan of Arc escorted Charles VII down the aisle, and he was coronated. That's where they used to coronate all the kings, and that's why Champagne used to only be for the French kings and everything.
It was a great book. I was sorry that he was so cowardly, and then they used any excuse to execute her. Of course, she could rally the troops. She was so they had to kill her. I mean, you know.
Mm-hmm. Okay. What do you think of Mark Twain's writing style?
I thought it was really great. I enjoyed the book.
Even today? Because, like, Mark Twain and Life on the Mississippi are hard to read because he tries to write in the dialect.
This was not hard to read.
Yeah, it's just...
really good. I enjoyed it very much. So, it really made her seem like a real person. And it was a shame it had such a bad ending.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What was the next one Picasso or James Baldwin? The next I couldn't believe it. The next book you read was James Baldwin, Go Tell It on the Mountain. Now again, these are books that I read like in the early 90s. I got really into Kerouac, and then I read a couple of the James Baldwin novels.
For like the first month I didn't go out of the apartment. So I was trying to exercise.
Afraid.
I know. Well, we can't live in fear, but, you know, it was caution to stay in.
We were smart.
Yeah, well,
yeah.
Yeah, it was a good thing to do. And you have to use your head during these times. But I was trying to exercise, so I'd walk around the apartment and look at the books, you know, from far off. And this book kind of jumped at me, Go Tell It to the Mountains. And I thought, oh, that sounds kind of interesting.
You told me when you were younger, your dream would have been to just have a room full of books and to lie around and read.
Yeah. And of course, I never got a chance to do that much, you know.
But I'm impressed that you pulled out James Baldwin and read Go Tell It on the Mountain.
It was a really good book. And the guy hated his father, and he went blow by blow in his life, how he got over the hatred of his father, you know, by finally looking at him as a human being and maybe the stuff that he had gone through. And the father was not a very good father to him, so he had loads of reasons to hate him, you know, but it was the step-by-step, blow-by-blow of how he got out of his hatred. And
so it never addresses his homosexuality, right?
No,
So it just
I had no hint.
You didn't know until I told you that.
No.
So why did he hate his father? Was his father just like, did he beat him up? Or?
Yeah, he was not a good father. He was pretty...
Was his father a preacher, or am I thinking...
Oh, yes. He was, you know, I think the problem, too, was not only did he hate his father, but the father was like a preacher, and so he had like two lives, in a way, showing his...
one face to the congregation.
One face, and then one face at home, and they were so different that he just... hated the way he treated his mother, too. So I think he had a problem with drinking and everything. So there were an awful lot of problems.
Interesting. You know, Marvin Gaye was killed by his father, and his father was a preacher. And his father used to, at home, would dress up like a woman around the house.
That's horrible.
He was a cross-dresser. And, ended up killing him over an insurance policy argument.
Well, this book was really well written. I enjoyed it. I could see why he hated him, and I could see why the guy was the way he was, as a preacher and as a person. And I was happy that he went through his hate for his father and seemed to have gotten over it. Not how it no longer affected his life.
Mm-hmm.
I thought it was really well done.
Well, yeah. What'd you think of his writing style?
I liked it. A really good book.
I love James Baldwin. I read that book and The Fire Next Time, and he spent a lot of time in Paris and in France, and he was not a very good-looking man, and
he could write.
Black and gay at the time that he was. He went through a lot of shit in his life. He was a super sensitive guy, and
he was a good writer.
I loved.
I haven't.
Loved
That's
his
the
books.
only thing I've read, but it was very good. I enjoyed it. Well written.
Go Tell It on the Mountain.
Yes.
So, and then you moved on to this Picasso period.
Yeah. Well,
That's quite a jump to go.
We were looking.
Joan of Arc to James Baldwin to Picasso.
Please.
3 completely different human beings.
Yeah. Interesting though, but we were looking at all these art documentaries, and so I wanted to know more about Picasso, and you had books. Books were available about him. So you had the first one I read was Picasso by Gertrude Stein. She was a friend of his, and he painted her, and so it was more like she was really for him, like everything he did was great, that kind of book.
It was very flattering.
A very flattering book, and it was easy to read. A short book, easy to read, had a lot of pictures. I am not 100% sure how to interpret modern art. I prefer older.
Yeah, we're both not
Yeah,
fans of.
but
I like Picasso's early stuff, like The Boy and the Horse, and he did these Harlequins, and when he was younger, he did like more traditional kind of painting.
Yeah,
It's the weird experimental stuff, like a woman with a titty on her neck, or like
eyes.
one eye. That stuff I've never
I didn't
enjoyed.
quite understand it. I thought, if I read this stuff, maybe I could understand it more. So it was an interesting book. And then you happen to have another book.
Then you got a little deeper, because the
Picasso.
Gertrude Stein book is pretty thin. Then you read this
Yeah.
John Berger book.
Yes.
And it's called The Success and Failure of Picasso.
Yes, and that was really interesting because he had a lot of different points of view and he understood all this modern art, and he had plenty of pictures to say how why he felt the way he did. And I was reading through the whole thing. It was so well written that I thought I would like to read some more of his books. And that doesn't usually happen. Like, I would like to read some more of his books. And then...
what were some juicy tidbits from the life of Picasso that you got?
The part that he was a definite womanizer, had tons of women, married and had mistresses and stuff.
I have this book written by one of his ex-wives, and he just tried to fucked most of her friends.
Well,
and she was, I think, 30 years younger than him.
Wanting to learn about his art and not his personal life that much. But of course, you can hardly separate the two. But what I was interested in, and it was actually, I didn't see where he was talking about the failure of Picasso that much until closer to the end, where his thought was that the last 20 years of his life, he didn't develop as an artist, and that the paintings he made as an old man didn't show that he had grown as an artist.
It was just repetitious.
Is what he was trying to say, and that a lot of those paintings were not even shown until after he died. He had loads of samples, of his pictures, and compared him to other painters who did the same kind of work.
Well, and from the art documentaries we've watched, Matisse was his big rival. And I much prefer Matisse. I think Matisse had great juxtapositions and contrasts of colors, and he seems to have grown.
Well, I don't really appreciate it, but it was interesting. And let me just read you a little teeny bit of this. And so it is with Picasso. This was the end. The waste of his genius or the frustration of his gifts should be a fact of great significance for us. Are dead to him and to his
There's
favors.
a helicopter coming.
We understand
Hold on. You should start over and read it just a little bit louder.
Okay.
And let's wait till this. There's been a lot of military, a lot of police helicopters, and then a lot of military helicopters flying over Los Angeles.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, and so it is with Picasso. The waste of his genius or the frustration of his gifts should be a fact of great significance for us. Our debt to him and to his failures, if we understand them properly, should be enormous. It was really, he wasn't looking to find a failure on Picasso. He was like, really, he enjoyed that kind of art, and he compared it to other artists who painted the same way, and how he had, blazed a trail in this new way of painting. It was pretty good and well written. I enjoyed it, even though I don't understand or appreciate that kind of art that much. It was interesting.
Any stories from his life that you can remember?
Well, all the women he had, good grief, it's hard to come up with one.
Yeah, it's funny too that he was a communist and he was super wealthy and going to the bullfights and living it up high on the hog wherever he went.
Yes, and he always and one of the things that John Berger in this book, The Success and Failure of Picasso, tried to say was that he was Spanish, and that Spanish people thought differently than the rest of the Europeans. And so that probably has a lot to do with the way he was. So that was interesting.
How did he think it? But just by being macho, or
yeah, and maybe
the Inquisition, cruelty?
More like he was not, a little bit depressive personality, maybe.
Oh, okay.
And he thought that Spanish people were kind of like that, and I don't know, maybe they are. No idea. But of course, it where you come from does have a lot to do with how you look at the world. So that's interesting.
True. So
I enjoyed the book. It was good.
And then after that book, you read this book that I suggested to you because it was such a good, quick read. It's called Paris at the End of the World by John Baxter, The City of Light During the Great War, 1914 to 1918.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it, and it was a quick read.
What did you remember? What did you like about it?
Well, the way he wrote, and he was an Australian person. He wrote this because his grandfather had been in that war. So,
and you told me a great line from it, because it's been a while since I read it. So it's great, you finding information I've forgotten. He said, no one volunteers for a war who's happy at home.
Yes, and that is in so many great works of literature where somebody will say the same thing.
Yeah.
Like Dr. Zhivago.
Yeah.
He said the same thing. Nobody volunteers for a war
who's happy at home.
Wow. And so he wasn't happy with his wife, so he went to war. Well, let me say that the Paris at that time, they just wanted to ignore the war and just party.
We are gay. We are happy.
Yeah. And just they didn't want to be bothered by something happening down the street.
Encroaching reality.
Yeah. So the book does tell a lot about the war, but a lot more about what was happening.
There was that great thing where the taxi drivers
yes.
drove all these troops to the front.
Yes.
Because they had no way of transporting them.
Yeah. So let me read a little bit on that. Just as war then stopped the French from staging an impromptu dance on the battlefield, it never succeeded in stifling the commercial instinct. Least of all taxi drivers. As the front stabilized, they presented their bills. At first, the line of fighting was 40 miles from Paris, so these taxi drivers took the soldiers to the front lines because there was no way to get them there. But so let me read you what happened afterwards. Just as the war then stopped the French from staging an impromptu dance on the battlefield, it never succeeded in stifling the commercial instinct, least of all taxi drivers. As the front stabilized, they presented their bills, 40 miles to the Marne and back, and at night rates too. And then there was the gasoline. The ministry bargained them down to 27%, including tip. War or no war, some things about Paris were eternal. So,
like not tipping.
Yeah. So they actually presented a bill to the government because they drove these soldiers to the front. It was.
Yeah. See, because I've heard that story, and it always seems romantic that the taxi drivers were heroic, but then you read that, and it's like, wait a minute, they were charging them. They were charging them the night rates.
Yeah.
And
gasoline
and tips and okay, so there's more to that story than you think.
There's a lot more. This book was really interesting because I really don't know very much about World War I. I just know a little bit about it, but not much. And he goes into all kinds of things that happened around the war, like Picasso had an opera, which I had no idea, but yeah, when I read the books on Picasso, it did say that he had done an opera with it was not a success, so
he's not famous for his operas.
No, and they had special music and everything, but they were dressed up as cubists in his cubit period, so the opera people were dressed like that, and it was interesting. And this book about Paris reminded me that Picasso had done an opera. And he also talks about the ways that people were swindled. The soldiers were swindled, all the different ways that they were swindled, and it was kind of interesting. And all the songs and propaganda, and it had he had a lot of information here of what was happening during that period. He also ended up, trying to find out about his grandfather, who was in the war, had been to Paris, and as an Australian, he married a French woman and moved to Paris, years later. So it kind of helped him researching this book to find out, what it was like for his grandfather.
Cool. So,
I really liked the book.
I'm glad you liked it. I thought you would. I thought there were a lot of interesting things that happened or changed in World War I. Was such a turning point in human history, like we're living in right now. Like, who knows what things are going to be like.
Well, I liked it so much that I decided I needed to know a little more about Australians.
Yeah, so you're the reason I love books, and I said it before, how you would take us to the library when we were kids, and every month, we'd go once a month, and then you'd get to pick out whatever it was, like 5 books. And I remember the thrill of having this entire library to go pick out 5 books on any topic that I wanted to learn about. And so that's where I fell in love with books, and I think it's really beautiful that of all the books that I have, you've made your own natural selections. I just suggested that one book for you, but
Yeah.
You made all your other choices, and then from reading that book,
Yeah.
I forgot that was told by an Australian's perspective.
Yeah, it was.
And then that made you grab this next book. What is it?
The next one I've just started. This one, The Fatal Shore, by Robert Hughes, and
The epic. Here, it's The Fatal Shore: The Epic of Australia's Founding. I read that 10 years ago when I was going to Australia a lot, and people told me that is like the definitive book on Australian early history, how the founding of Australia. And I loved that book.
well, it started out. I'm just starting the book, but it went to talk about the laws that were in place in 1700s. And why they had so many people that were in jails. And part of why they had this penal colony in Australia was because they didn't build new jails. They just talked about it but never did. And the laws were more to protect property than people. But it was...
And people could be thrown in jail for being a debtor. If you had debt, then basically then they're gonna ship you somewhere and you're gonna be someone's slave.
It sounded like just about anything. If they stole a tiniest bit of, a little kid stealing something would land in jail, and a woman stole some cheese and landed in jail, and they were going to kill her, and then they rescinded the death penalty, so she went to Australia, and she did, and I think she hung herself.
She hung herself when she got to Australia.
Yeah, after a while. I didn't get to that
Well,
part.
it's such a, I told you this in England, in London, where they can be kind of hard on a visiting foreigner. I've heard they call people from Australia convicts, and they call Americans septics, as in septic tank where the shit goes. No, this isn't every English person, just, some of the more unfriendly ones. And I think it's such a mind-blowing thing that you think of like the Charles Dickens level poverty that was happening in England when they took these people who were convicted criminals and sent them to Australia, which I think is paradise. And they land on the beaches, and there's these animals they've never seen before, and Aboriginals, they've never even seen these kind of people before. And you go to the grocery store in Australia now, and in all the grocery stores, kangaroo meat is kind of like a pricey, expensive delicacy. And they wouldn't touch the meat there. What I remember from that book was that the first people who went to Australia would prefer to eat the barrels of salted meat that had maggots in it than to have some delicious fresh kangaroo meat or eat an emu or something.
If you read anything about Lewis and Clark, when they were in their expeditions, they run across the American Indians who ate a lot of salmon, and they didn't want to eat salmon. I might not be saying that properly, but they just wanted meat. It's just what you're used to.
Yeah.
But it's interesting.
Well, also on that Lewis and Clark thing, I found out from going to Oregon, one of the guys was a crumb, Clark. He had like a slave go with him, and the slave actually saved his life. And then when he got back to civilization, he didn't free the slave who had like saved his life and like helped the exploration team many times. And then Clark ended up committing suicide in a hotel outside of St. Louis.
It's all a different way of looking at things,
Yeah, well, if somebody saves your life, you should
be a little grateful.
Cut them a little slack.
Yeah. Well.
So what has stood out?
So far
for you in this Fatal Shore book so far?
Well, how people didn't really find Australia that much. Captain Cook did kind of go around it, but then it was kind of lost for like 200 years or something. It was a long time somebody finding it, you know.
Captain Cook, it's interesting. I was in Australia the last time, I guess about 4 years ago, when they were having the issue in the United States with the Confederate statues. They were saying that some Confederate statues should come down. And when I was in Australia, they were having the same issue in Sydney for the Captain Cook statues. Because they said he didn't discover it. How can you discover a people who were already there, and blah, blah, blah. So people had vandalized this Captain Cook statue in Sydney. And they were saying they should tear down all of them. Captain Cook was killed in Hawaii by Hawaiian natives. So when I was in Australia, I told them, you shouldn't take down the Captain Cook statue. You should just surround it with statues of Hawaiians approaching with spears.
Oh, good grief. That's funny.
Now, I wanted to... those are the books that you've read. Did you have anything else to say about Fatal Shore?
No, it's a really interesting book. It's a pretty big book. It's going to take me a while to finish, but it's interesting because it goes into an awful lot of detail about, what people would say was a problem. Minor theft, there were 431. He had a whole list of things. Petty theft, including...
431 what? Oh, that's the number of... these are the people who first went to Australia.
Yes.
Minor theft, 431.
Private theft, including breaking and entering, 93. Highway robbery, 71. Stealing cattle or sheep, 44. You know, he's got all this statistics.
Robbery with violence, 31. Grand larceny, 9. Fencing, receiving stolen goods, 8. Swindling, impersonation, 7. Forgery of documents, banknotes, 4. And
Well, some of these seem as though they were, highway robbery and stuff like that was pretty bad. But he goes on further in explaining how you could go to jail for just about anything. Some of the other things they had was like ages. Under 15, there were 3 men and 2 women, and they lumped the women, men, and children together.
on the boats.
On the boats. It was pretty horrendous.
So that's the book part, and now I wanted to talk with you about all the educational art documentaries that we've watched. But before we move into that, how is the food that I've been cooking for you?
I really have been getting spoiled. You have been, he does all the cooking, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and it really makes every day something new. I had no idea you were such a good cook.
And you turned me onto this great recipe that I've done twice now, oven fried chicken.
Yes.
I love fried chicken. If you're looking for a thing to make at home, it's not as messy as regular fried chicken. You bake it in the oven.
It's a lot healthier because
super
it's
easy.
Lot
oh my
less
gosh.
grease. So yeah, kind of suggested that, but you went with it.
Delicious.
And got all the stuff and went ahead and did it, and it's been really great.
Yeah, and I wanted to tell this other story that I forgot to tell last week, where and the very first week you were here, before the whole virus shit lockdown happened, I did this to you when I was a kid. And here's something, if you have children, this is something that my mom used to do for me when I was a kid, and it's one of my happiest memories. But when my mom would do the laundry, and she would take the laundry out of the dryer, and it's nice all warm and, fresh, hot clothes in the basket, my mom would say, "Are you ready for the best feeling in the world?" And then when I would say yes, she would pour the hot, warm laundry over me.
Well, it was right before folding the laundry.
Yeah, before folding it.
Well, I had forgotten about that until you mentioned it.
Well, it's one of my favorite memories, one of my happiest things you ever did for me when I was a kid. So the first week when you were visiting me, and I did the laundry, And I said, Mom, okay. I said, I want you to come over here and sit down. I took you in the guest room where the couch folds out into a bed. And I said, okay, now lie back. And I took your glasses off. And I said, are you ready for the best feeling in the world? And then I got to dump the warm, hot laundry on you.
Yeah, that brought back memories.
Isn't that the happiest feeling
It
in
was
the world?
a pretty good feeling, although
Are you
something
ready
silly.
for the best feeling in the world?
It was kind of silly, but, I'm glad it brought good memories.
I loved it. Well, Mom, you turned me on to books, and also you're the reason that I love art and learning things. Because, you've always been curious. You've always had a curious mind. And what's really great about our time together is that we really both enjoy the same things, like reading and...
That really helps.
Art. So we've been watching... I made a list. So far, this is all of the documentaries that we've watched. So the first one, I had the DVDs. It's from 1969. This BBC series called Civilization.
It was really, really good.
And I remember the Civilization when Notre Dame burned. I read an article, and it said in the article it was talking about Notre Dame, and it quoted this show Civilization, where the guy said he felt this was like man's greatest achievement in civilization, like the height of civilization, human beings working together to make something grand and beautiful instead of war and destroying shit.
The churches in Europe are just so overwhelming. You can't see it all. It's so wonderful.
Well, and it's too bad because now we watched that like a month ago. I can't remember all the details, but basically it's... And I really enjoyed watching it now because now that humanity is having a setback, it's a good time to review human history's highlights. So what do you think were some of the greatest highlights that he touched on?
Well, he had an awful lot to say about all the painters that he showed, and I really enjoyed it. Don't really have the words for all this stuff. You could see how art went from a two-dimensional depiction of a person to a three-dimensional, little by little, and how the colors and everything went together to make it, to give it a story. And it was, in churches, because lots of people couldn't read and stuff, so they would just look at these pictures, and the pictures told a story. It was just wonderful.
Yeah, I liked it. And then how the printing press changed things, and it's
and they showed an old printing press, and they kind of showed how it worked. It's amazing how some crude machines changed the world.
Yeah, you could get messages out to...
And you can read the stuff, but to see it, the visual of it, is really helpful.
Okay, so the next one we watched was... I highly recommend Civilization. I would even like to watch it again. But the next one we watched was this BBC art series called Modern Masters. And it was one about Andy Warhol, one about Matisse, one about Picasso, one about Salvador Dali.
That's why I read all those Picasso books, because you had the Picasso
Because
books.
we watched that Modern Masters.
Yeah.
Well, and it's interesting. I never liked Andy Warhol. And then I told you about my friend Sam Coleman in Amsterdam. When I lived there, he would dress up like Andy Warhol. And we'd go out to clubs, and he had a wig, and he had a little Polaroid camera. And then he would be in the character of Andy Warhol. So he loved him. And I always thought it was kind of silly, and, girls would always come around because they wanted a free Polaroid or whatever. But, he's the one that first started to hit me on why Andy Warhol was great. I love the band The Velvet Underground. And Andy Warhol produced their first records and got them rolling, and they played at his parties. I mean, that's the reason I love Andy Warhol mainly. But when I was in Pittsburgh, I went to the Andy Warhol Museum, and it's remarkable. He was shot by a woman, and he was almost paralyzed for life. And this woman had started this man-hating group. I forget what the name of the club was. Maybe it was even Man Killers Club or something. And she was the only member, and she shot the guy. And then his life, the last 10 years of his life, or however long, was he had to wear a brace and was very uncomfortable. And
that is awful. Some of the stories that you hear about the artist are hard to imagine.
Yeah, well, I'm gonna mention that in a minute, because a lot of the movies we've watched have been a little too rough for you. But we're watching these art documentaries. All these artists' lives,
they were pretty rough.
A lot of them were fruitcakes. A lot of them were,
Caravaggio, your favorite artist.
Yeah, he was a total fruitcake.
Yeah.
But I just want to say about Andy Warhol that Andy Warhol said that in the future everyone will be famous for 15 minutes. And I would like to make a new version of that. I think in the future, everyone will have their turn to play Batman.
Oh, good grief.
In a movie. Okay, then...
You used to run around with a Batman outfit when you were a little kid.
Yeah.
I don't know if you even remember.
I have the 70s Batman TV show. I have them on DVD I bought. And when I was a kid, I had this...
music, you kept running back and forth. Yeah.
Yeah, I had this little Batman hat, and you tied it under your chin.
You wore that until it wore out.
And a cape, and I remember I would sleep in it.
Yeah,
and I would sleep.
You loved it.
I mean, there's home movies of me sleeping.
You were just a little kid when you did that.
Yeah.
And you jump on the furniture.
In my Batman outfit. I loved Batman. The next one we watched was also a BBC thing, and it was called The Private Life of a Masterpiece, where they showed about the different lives of these paintings and stuff. Do you remember that? Some of them were about art heists.
Yes, well, like the Mona Lisa was stolen quite a few times.
Well, stolen the main time by an Italian guy.
Yeah. Who
took it and put it under his bed in his apartment. And he wanted to return it to Italy, but it never belonged to Italy. Da Vinci made it for the King of France. Shows you people ready to take a stand. Don't even know
He didn't know the history.
The history. Then the next one we watched was The High Art of the Low Countries, which is also a BBC thing. And this was all about the art in the Netherlands and Belgium.
The Dutch art, how they started. They went from religious paintings to just painting everyday life. And that was really interesting, too. And, of course, Rembrandt. And all the art that we saw when you were living in Amsterdam and I came to visit.
That was fun. And you bought a year pass to the Van Gogh Museum.
I love those museums.
And I used that. I went there like 4 times that year.
They had a lot of museums in that city. Different kinds of museums.
Yeah, and I told you, on Museum Plain, where the Van Gogh Museum is, sometimes I would take a soccer ball out there and kick it up against the wall of the Van Gogh Museum. It was a lot of fun.
Oh, the Van Gogh Museum was really interesting, too.
And I know we both love Rembrandt, and I've read so much about Rembrandt's life, and, you know, he fell out of favor. The Religious Society of Amsterdam, who he had made these beautiful, you know, I think Rembrandt's strength was painting scenes from the Bible. And he would often use his wife or his son, Titus. But after his wife died, he got together with this servant girl called Hendrikia, and the same religious society of Amsterdam, who had made him a star, turned on him, and there was a trial. She was charged with living in whoredom with that artist Rembrandt, but she really loved him. She stuck by his side even after he went bankrupt and everything was sold. Now, right down the street in Antwerp, Rubens is the exact opposite of Rembrandt. He was great with his money. He built this big house. He held on to it forever. He was even a diplomat and got sent to Madrid to negotiate some peace treaty.
That was really interesting.
And then he was knighted in England. And he was very wealthy. And then he liked to paint plump women, which is where the expression Rubenesque comes from. But the thing that I didn't know about Rubens was when he was 53 years old, he married a 16-year-old girl.
Pretty crazy.
And nobody had a problem with it because he was a star. And he's swimming in cash. And he's got a big-ass house. And then what we learned from the high art of the Low Countries was that he, the last 10 years of his life, he didn't take commissions and he just painted what he wanted. And he hung out with his very young wife, and they had two kids. Well,
he had enough money to do that, and that was good.
Yeah. We'll be going to the Orchard property for a few weeks. Okay, I know the sun is coming in. We just have it's a few more to cover here. Then we went with photography. We watched, it's called New York and Paris. Abbott and Aguette. Do you remember that? This guy was a photographer in Paris in like the 1880s, 1890s. And then this woman moved to Paris in the 30s, made friends with him, and then she kept all of his plates. They were actually like glass plates, and she held on to them. And then she moved back to New York City, and the influence she got from this guy, she started photographing New York in the 50s.
In the same way that he had.
In the way he had done Paris in the 1880s.
Yeah, it was really interesting. And she kind of kept his fame.
Yeah, he'd have been forgotten. All these great photos of Paris
right.
in the 1880s would have been lost forever.
Right.
And she did this famous picture of New York City where all the lights are on in the buildings.
That was a fantastic
She
shot.
went on top of the Empire State Building when it was during winter, and then the sun went down early and everybody was still in their offices and the lights were still on. So she took that at like 4:30. It's this famous night photo.
Most everybody has seen that photo. It was really good.
After that, we watched the PBS show The Life and Times of Frida Kahlo.
Yes, she's one of your favorites.
I love Frida. I mean, anybody that's that honest about their thick mustache.
Well, she led an interesting life. She was almost killed in an accident, which affected her the rest of her life.
Yeah, she was on a trolley that a car ran into, and some pole went into her pelvis.
Yeah, went right through her. Yeah, but I thought she was a greater painter than her husband.
I agree with you there. She was way better than Diego. And the great thing about Frida was she took the pain in her life and made art out of it. That's the beauty of Frida Kahlo.
Yeah, she even had a school. I didn't realize that she had a school.
He was just painting all this like communist shit, imagery and stuff.
Yeah.
She took her pain and made art of it. Yeah, and they said she had an art school at the end, and she would walk around naked, talking to her pupils and stuff.
Kind of different.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, the lives of these artists are more racy than some of these movies we've been seeing.
It's kind of different, yeah.
Then we watched, this is from the Biography channel, I don't know where I found this DVD, Vincent van Gogh, A Stroke of Genius. What do you think of?
Oh, I loved his stuff. When I went to the Van Gogh Museum, some of the paintings were so brilliant that you could almost feel like the strokes were moving the way he had it. And they had a whole floor. I was so impressed that they have a whole floor on that museum, the Van Gogh Museum, where they are trying to figure out how he painted. So
how he did it with like the thickness and brushstrokes and everything.
Yes.
And then what is it called, pointillism, the points.
Yeah, I don't think he did too much pointillism, but his art was just wonderful, and they're still trying to figure out how he did it.
Sad life.
I was very impressed. He had a very sad life.
He just couldn't. He tried to be a priest, and then he was giving his clothes to the poor, and he was kind of a hothead. He would argue with people, and then really bad choices with women. He fell in love with his cousin who rejected him, and I think her husband had just died, and he said, let's get married. She said, look, you creep, I'm still mourning the death of my husband.
He wasn't too smart with women.
Then he moves to The Hague, and he falls in love with this alcoholic prostitute who has a child, and he gets syphilis.
Yep. And
he's in love with this. Everybody's telling him, dude, this is a big mistake. And it took him like a long while before he figured out that woman wasn't right. And then, of course, Rachel, the prostitute in Arla, that he cut his ear off for.
He had a lot of mental problems. And his brother tried to help him. And it's kind of a shame that in his lifetime he only sold one painting.
The Red Orchard, I think it's called.
It was interesting. It wasn't. I didn't like it as much as some of his other works. But hey, everybody to their own taste. But
to each his own, said the lady as she kissed the donkey's ass.
Good grief!
You know who used to say that?
Who?
Mildred.
Oh, jeez. She was
my father's mother.
Yep, that's something she would say. But anyway, his brother tried to help him, and he gave him money to buy paints and stuff. And at the end, he killed himself. Lingering too. He wasn't that good at killing himself either, but it was the brother's wife who really pursued all the art people about.
She collected she had all the stuff that was left, and then she wrote letters and went to places where he had lived, and then she got together everything he had ever painted that she could find. And she got all the letters.
All the letters and everything. It was because of her that he got famous.
I have the book of letters of Vincent van Gogh's letters.
That might be interesting to read.
And he ends it with a firm handshake.
Uh-huh.
That's how he would end the letters to his brother.
Huh. The brother died shortly after he
died. 6 months afterwards.
Yeah, it was.
So they had a beautiful love story.
Well, it was pretty sad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's sad that, he couldn't sell anything. And
that he thought he was a failure.
Yeah.
And
some of the most beloved art ever created.
Yeah, it's pretty horrendous that people don't appreciate your art until after you're dead, most of the time.
Yeah. Well, I think that's one reason people love Van Gogh so much, is the tragic story behind it. Because a lot of, what's happier than sunflowers and all these, happy scenes. And he did do a lot of, maybe not pointillism exactly, but he did a lot of self-portraits with dabbing and stuff like that.
Yeah. Pure color. It really was the way he handled pure color. They're still trying to figure out how he did it. And the interesting thing about that museum was they had his work and Gauguin's, I think it was Gauguin, looking at the same view and the different way that they both portrayed the.
It was Gauguin when Gauguin was living there.
Yeah.
With him in Arla.
And that didn't work well because he was a little nutso.
The next thing we watched, it was made by the Hermitage Museum, and it's 4 DVDs, but only the first 2 were. It's the Hermitage Museum of St. Petersburg. And so there was 10 episodes, 10 half-hour episodes on the first disc, and then 10 half-hour episodes on the second thing, and they're wonderful, and they're all these different periods of art, periods in each way, like Impressionism or the Italian Renaissance.
I know it was a really great museum, but I had no idea how wonderful it really was, and that you got a chance to go there is really fantastic. And I really enjoyed that. They had so much that there's no way you could see it in a week, I guess.
No, I would love to go back. And we had, fortunately, it was when I was filming for the Dutch travel show, and it's they're very strict about filming in the Hermitage, and because the Dutch government had just given 7 million euros to the Hermitage for them to fix the roof and the Rembrandt room leaked. So because they had just gotten 7 million euros from the Dutch government, and we were from Holland, we had total access.
That's great.
And it's the most Rembrandts in one place in the world.
Oh, the building itself was fantastic. They had one whole half an hour on just the building. They have so much art in that place. It was unbelievable.
I would love to go
everywhere.
back, and it's remarkable what Catherine the Great did and Peter the Great. I really loved the city of St. Petersburg, and it's cool. At the beginning of it, they show this kind of montage of St. Petersburg at the beginning of these episodes, and there's a dome building with like it's like a half circle of like classic marble columns. And then there's a fountain in front of it, and there's a patch of green grass. And I told you this great story when we were filming there. I had to give some little speech about St. Petersburg, and there's all these dirty-faced street kids that were sitting there watching me film it, and they had a soccer ball. And they'd stopped kicking soccer, and they're watching me do this thing. So they didn't speak English, but they would interrupt me. Like, I'd get like 2 sentences in, and one of them would yell, and then they'd all giggle. So they kept screwing up the take. So they did it about 3 or 4 times, and then suddenly I jumped up and with my foot stole the soccer ball, kicked it, dribbled it all the way down to the other end of this little mini park, and the kids chased me. And then I worked my way past these kids with the ball and got back to the film spot. And then I had these kids sit with me, and then I had one of them count off 3, 2, 1, and I made them a part of it. And then they shut up while I had to do the speech. It
That
was like
sounds so like
this
something
really,
you do.
this really cool, beautiful moment that
Yeah.
that happened there.
And there was like a river right by it. It
The
was
Neva River.
really beautiful shots of the building itself.
Yeah, the Hermitage is spectacular, and
It's even
there's a
greater in the
documentary
middle.
about what the workers did during World War II. How they took all the art out because they didn't want the Germans to come and steal it. And then there was at one point where all this world's greatest, the greatest art from human history was on these trains. And they could have been blown up by the Germans thinking that they were just like, supply trains or something. But fortunately, the hard work of the Hermitage workers, and it was cool. And we got to go eat in the employees' cafeteria in the basement.
Wow, that's really
I remember I got kind of a kick out of that because the story of the workers of the Hermitage saving all that art. I was like, oh, fuck. You're really cool if you work at the Hermitage.
Well, you're cool if you work at any museum, major museum, I think.
What is that called? A docent?
Well, they're the ones that show you around and tell you all about the different
The smarty.
paintings.
Yeah. Okay, so the last one that we've been watching, and it's on the same disc series. I thought it was just the more Hermitage stuff, but it's another. I don't know. I don't think it's BBC. I think maybe it might have been made for universities or colleges. It's called The Great Artists with Tim Marlowe.
I wouldn't have been surprised if it wasn't for art history classes.
That's what I think. Like maybe it was a
Yeah.
university class.
He has so much information about each painting and each artist, and he travels to the city and shows us the art. There were several artists I'd never even heard of, but had beautiful artwork.
Yeah, there was a bunch of them I had never, like the female cassette.
Yeah,
That woman who
I knew
she
about
was
her. Yeah,
she was in Paris in the 30s with the Impressionist people, and we didn't know about Dürer, the German guy.
Well, that woman painter, I thought she was famous for children's paintings, her children's paintings, and I could just imagine she was a mother and painted her children. Well, it turns out that she never even had children of her own. That was
and the thing that
interesting.
stood out for you were her
that she,
paintings of kids.
yeah, 'cause
Interesting.
she, and they showed all this other work that she'd done that I had no idea. I mostly had seen the children, her treatment of children's paintings. She was really good at painting children and stuff, but she could paint other things,
But so many. They're half hour each, and they're great little half hour stories of the life of these artists, like Rodin. He was with he had his wife, or this woman, Rose, and then he had a mistress, and then at the end he marries the Rose, the first one.
Yeah.
Just very complicated stories. You know, like I was making the joke that I've been, worried about some movies being too hard for you, but like the lives of these artists are fascinating. Like from this great artist thing, I didn't know. So they had one on Da Vinci, one on Michelangelo, and then we have one more left, and I've never even heard of the one we have left. But we've gotten through like 30 of these, or 40 of them.
Quite a lot.
And so the thing that I just learned that I never knew, Da Vinci, Michelangelo, and Raphael were all painting at the same time. And they were doing projects for the Vatican and the Catholic Church. So they were competing with each other, basically. And I know that Da Vinci and Michelangelo hated each other's guts. I had heard that. But I didn't know that Da Vinci had left his notebooks, most of his notebooks, to a man who might have been his gay lover. They said on the thing. And then Michelangelo was gay, but he was so religious at the end of his life, he was very conflicted about his homosexuality and eternal damnation. And then he did he designed, at the end of his life, the dome on St. Peter's Basilica of the Vatican, and he didn't charge the Vatican any money. He did it for free, I guess basically hoping that, God might forget that he had...
whatever he had
done a lot
of...
yeah.
Well, it was interesting. And what I thought was interesting, that they both were commissioned to do giant paintings in the same room, and neither one of them finished them. They showed the paintings as they left them, but they were like a whole wall,
like half finished.
Yeah. They were all there. It was like a fighting a war, commemorating some war. But it was interesting that neither one of them finished it. That's got to be a story to that.
Mm-hmm. And then I'm sorry, I'm thinking of somebody else. But then Raphael, he was very much a ladies' man. He said he was very hedonistic, and that he had contracted some kind of venereal disease or some kind of disease from his running around, and that he told the doctor it was something else, and he was mistreated. They drained him with leeches, and then he died.
Yep.
So he had lied to the doctor because he didn't want anybody to know that he had been up to doing some freaky stuff. So I thought that was pretty mind-blowing, just to know that about those three guys.
Yeah.
All working at the same time.
And you look at their art, and it's so beautiful. You forget that it's people, and people do dorky things sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the lives of artists are a lot of fruitcake.
A lot of fruitcakes.
A lot of fruitcakes. So I think that's it for our episode today. Is there any other thoughts you want to share on art or the global pandemic?
Not really. I'm glad we're getting a chance to see all this art and read all these books.
Yeah, we've really been educating ourselves. I mean, and I've learned so many things about these artists that I didn't know before.
Right, but I'm over this virus thing.
Yeah. I think everybody's pretty exhausted with it.
I'm ready to get back to normal, whatever that is, but it'll probably be a while.
It might be a good while till you get to go home, and that we all get to go outside again. So
yeah.
I think the best thing we can do is try and stay cheerful.
Oh, well, look at the blessings that we have. We're healthy and we're together, and that's a giant
Well, it's nice to be able to hug my mommy.
It's nice.
And I'm sure that everybody who's listening to this, appreciates the person that they're with, that they can hug.
Yeah.
But I'm really impressed with the books that you've read since you've been here. And now I totally get my love of books and art from you, Mom.
Well,
and cooking.
I appreciate your cooking for me. This is, I haven't been waited on like this ever. I'm glad you're cooking. I'm glad you're a good cook.
Thanks, Mommy. And I just finished reading the 820-page book on Napoleon.
Oh, that was monumental.
So I've got a lot to say about that. In the next episode, I hope it's just going to be all about the life of Napoleon and what I learned and what I thought about it. So in closing, my dearest mother, do you have any words of wisdom, or what's your favorite memory from? Oh, we got to go outside. I felt like I was like, you got to. There's a park across the street from my house, and I made the joke that I have to take my mother for a walk.
That was, when you are able to go outside, it really was. I really needed to be outside for.
You hadn't been out in a month.
So it was good to be out and stretch your legs and just get some exercise outside. So it was interesting that I thought more people would have masks, but there are a lot of young people think they're invincible, and but everybody was keeping distances. Distances, I thought, people were keeping distances, but maybe not as many wearing masks as they should have. I don't know. But, we didn't come that close to anybody.
Yeah, and it's cool, too, that I live by the Grove and the farmer's market. And so Sunday we went for the walk. And for it being a nice, warm, hot, sunny Sunday, there wasn't that many people in the park.
No.
And then we walked through the Grove, and they've got the dancing water fountain there. The same people that do the Bellagio in Las Vegas do this fountain, and they were playing Easy Like Sunday Morning.
Yeah.
And the place the Grove was virtually empty, and walking through there and singing along with the song Easy Like Sunday Morning, I think that's one of my favorite memories ever.
Yeah.
Of living in this area.
It was nice.
And then also we've got the farmer's market, which is great. So I can go there and buy produce and things like that and not have to go to the grocery store unless I absolutely have to. And then every day we've been doing our sunset ritual at 7:20. We've been watching the sunset. What do you think about this golden great. California sunlight, Mom?
Well, I'm appreciating it more than I used to because I'm seeing, golden hills. I didn't get that, but now I'm getting it. It really is a golden light. I guess I didn't realize that before. You have to be here a while. And I like what you say when the sun goes down. Tell them what you say.
Hey, you did a great job today, son. Enjoy your trip around the earth, and we'll see you tomorrow.
I know. I'll get a kick out of it when you say that.
That's beautiful.
That is beautiful.
Mom, I love having you here. I wouldn't want to be experiencing this with anybody else but you.
Thank you.
And thank you to all my listeners. Thank you to all the nice messages. Oh, that's the thing I wanted to say at the beginning of this episode. I got so many nice messages from people, and people who are supporting the podcast, which I couldn't be more grateful. And I wrote a few of you back, but I couldn't write everybody back. But the thing that I wanted to express is that your words mean more to me than the money. Of course, I appreciate the money, but my man Shane in Sydney, Australia, telling me that my podcast had helped him through difficult periods in his life. Peter in Manchester, New Hampshire, saying that I had made him laugh through the years. Those words have been so uplifting for me and make me feel like I've actually done a good thing with my life.
Well, it's good to know that you're making a difference in people's lives.
Yeah.
And making them laugh is a real gift.
Yeah, and the fact that all my work has been wiped out and people are still supporting the podcast, and that I really appreciate the money, but those words really, really, just really, I can't express to you how good it makes me feel. And I feel like a rich man.
Oh,
So
you are rich.
I am rich, Mommy.
We're rich in so many ways, and it's good to look at the blessings that we have.
It's true. And I'm blessed that you're with me, Mom.
Me too, Tom.
Okay. All right, everybody. Have a great week. Be safe. Stay mentally strong. And shalom, amigos. Amigas. Long may you run. Hooray for humanity.
Tom Rhodes, you're a funny man. Tom Rhodes, you're an international comedian. Tom Rhodes, karate kick, baby, oh yeah. Tom Rhodes, you're a groovy dude. You go all around the world, telling jokes to all of the people. You are an international comedian. You're funny to everybody in every single country in the world. Tom Rhodes, I like you very much. I think you're talented and very wonderful. Tom Rhodes, you're the best guy in the world. I wanna be your friend. You should call me sometime. Here is my phone number, 603-644-0048. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Tom Rhodes, you're an international comedic sensation. Tom Rhodes, I like to listen to your podcast. Tom Rhodes, you're the best man to ever walk on the earth.